The sky above the port was the color of a television tuned to a dead channel. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the opening line, perhaps the most famous opening line ever penned in a science fiction novel. And it appears here in Neuromancer by William Gibson, the Canadian author, in 1984. And today we're going to go over this book. We're going to ask the questions, how influential was this book here in 1984 for the creation of a new genre of science fiction? Spoiler alert, the answer to that question is very. But then we're going to follow that question up with another one, which is perhaps even more important. And that question is this a good book? Is this just an entertaining book on its own as a science fiction novel within the lexicon of science fiction? And I'll get to that here by the end of the video. So what is Neuromancer? If you're not familiar with this book, if this is a new novel to you, it was published in 1984 by Canadian author William Gibson. And its importance is because it, for the very first time here, defines the genre of cyberpunk in this novel, Neuromancer. This book is actually based off of or I should say it's an expansion of a short story that appeared in Omni magazine in 1981. It was titled Johnny Mnemonic by William Gibson. A lot of the same themes and even the same characters from that short story, it's only 28 pages long, I just reread it as well, are then fleshed out and expanded here into this novel, Neuromancer. That's kind of the origin of the book. And the book is important. But why is this book important? It's important because this is the book that for the first time ever takes all of those disparate elements of cyberpunk that have been floating around out there. It coalesces them together, it defines them, and then it creates the genre of cyberpunk. It defines the genre of cyberpunk, and it becomes the archetypal book for what cyberpunk should be going forward, henceforth, into the future and infinity. Now, it didn't create cyberpunk. There were other authors prior to William Gibson, going back decades, who had been writing about particular elements that make up cyberpunk, but had never put it all together. And I suppose at this point, we should really define what cyberpunk is. And cyberpunk is a genre of science fiction that occurs in the near future. It is a dystopian vision of the future. And it is a vision where humanity and technology have merged and blended, where you have technology actually implanted into and affecting human beings directly. And it is almost always told through the eyes of an outsider, as the outsiders and the downtrodden in this dystopian universe use this cyberpunk technology in order to fight the system. And that in general is what cyberpunk is. Now, as I said, William Gibson wasn't the first person to use and write about elements of cyberpunk. He owes an immense debt of gratitude to a number of other science fiction authors, those being William S. Burroughs, J.G. Ballard, Samuel R. Delaney with his book Babel 17 from 1966, Roger Zelazny with his book The Dream Master, also from 1966. These and others were all writing with elements of cyberpunk that definitely influenced William Gibson, as well as noir detective novels from the 1940s, because that style of writing is very prevalent here as well with Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. They have a definite influence in this book as well. But it's William Gibson who takes all these elements, all that noir detective, all those cyberpunk elements, and then fuses them together here for the first time in 1984 and creates the genre of cyberpunk. So what's this book's influence? And it's absolutely immense, as I said before. This book is definitely a novel that deserves to be mentioned in the same breath with other seminal books of science fiction, such as Ringworld, I, Robot, Starship Troopers, and Dune. It's very much up there with those other novels in terms of its impact. It's influenced countless authors since its creation here in 1984, not the least of which is Neil Stephenson here with his novel Snow Crash, which probably would not exist. It definitely wouldn't exist without the creation of Neuromancer. I am currently reading this. This is a loaner book from a coworker of mine, and I'll do a video on this book when I'm finished with it. In addition to influencing cyberpunk literature, defining it, moving it forward, it had influence of the adaptations of cyberpunk into film, most notably in Johnny Mnemonic, the movie, starring Keanu Reeves, which is a terrible movie. That was an awful adaptation. I saw it in the theater. It's funny. It's almost worth watching though for the unintentional humor that's in that movie and in graphic novels. But most importantly, perhaps the most important, is that this book, it jumped the bounds of literature. Its influence made it out of science fiction, out of literature, out into society at large, and actually had an effect on the development and progress of the internet itself. Its influence was that great. This is the book that created the word cyberspace. It created the concept of cyberspace. It created the concept of virtual reality. It created the concept of hackers and hacking, of the World Wide Web, of firewalls in order to protect your software and your systems from hackers. All that appears here in this 1984 book by William Gibson. And there were definitely young teenage kids who were reading this in 1984, 1985, who went on to become the programmers, the computer programmers that developed and fleshed out the internet. And they were absolutely influenced by the concepts that were in this book. And to one degree or another, the current internet, the current World Wide Web, owes a debt. It owes some of its construction, some of its structure and its terminology to this book here by William Gibson. And that is absolutely huge. It's absolutely colossal. So that's the book. That's why it's important. That's what its influence is. What about the plot of this book? Let's go into the actual plot, the actual story. And moving forward, there will be some minor spoilers, but nothing major. But before we can get to the plot of the book, we need to talk about and define a couple of the terms that are used in here so that you can fully grasp what's going on in the book. So we're going to do a little lexicography. We're going to do a little appendix to help us with the terms and definitions and the ideas that come up in this book. And the first and the biggest and the most major one is cyberspace, because this is the book that creates the idea of cyberspace. It creates the word cyberspace. And cyberspace is defined by William Gibson is a consensual hallucination depicting a complex, immersive digital environment where users can interact and navigate it virtually. So that is the main concept here of the book, cyberspace. Then you also have the word cowboy or cyberspace cowboy. This is just the name for hackers that appear in the book. You have ICE, which is an acronym for the firewalls, and ICE stands for Intrusion Countermeasures Electronic, which is simply put firewalls, except these are firewalls that are lethal to cowboys who are navigating the cyberspace, the virtual world, the virtual reality. If you encounter ICE and you're not prepared for it, it can actually kill you, which leads to the next term, which is a flatline. A flatline is a cowboy hacker who was out in the cyberspace, in the internet, encountered a programming of ICE, encountered an ICE entity, and the ICE entity killed him while he's in cyberspace. But since he's jacked into his computer, his personality and his brainwaves have been preserved in a ROM program that can be downloaded and then accessed and booted up and used as a flatline program to recreate a digital version of this cowboy hacker. And those are flatlines. The other term we have is the sprawl. The sprawl is simply the merging of all the major eastern cities on the eastern seaboard of the United States into one giant mega city. Think Judge Dredd. And that's the sprawl. You have jacked in. Jacked in is simply the act of a cowboy hacker plugging in his cybernetically enhanced neurosystem into cyberspace. And jacked in was actually the original working title of the book here, Neuromancer. And I'm glad they changed it because I think Neuromancer is a much better title to the book. We have Razor Girls as well. Razor Girls are women who have traveled to Chiba City. Chiba City in Japan. Chiba City is the epicenter of cybernetic enhancements on the face of planet Earth. So Razor Girls have gone to Chiba City and they've had their bodies cybernetically enhanced in order to become mercenaries and hired muscles for the crime syndicates in the world. So the main plot of the book is we have a cowboy, a cyberspace cowboy by the name of Case, who was caught stealing on his last job, and his employers, instead of killing him, decided to do him one worse. Instead of killing him outright, they went in and they destroyed all of his cybernetic nervous implants that allows him to jack directly into cyberspace and the internet in order to be a cyberspace cowboy, which he is addicted to immensely. Think like a heroin addict's type of addiction, and that's his addiction to being plugged into cyberspace. So they have destroyed him, and he is now living his life working small level underworld crime missions for little crime bosses in Chiba City. And he is subconsciously trying to get himself killed because he can't stand living without being jacked into the internet. So Case is living this existence when he is approached by a person by the name of Armitage, who makes a proposition to him that they will rebuild his cybernetic systems, his cybernetic nervous system, to allow him to jack back into the internet if he will work a hacking job for them, if he will go out and be a cowboy on an extremely dangerous mission. And this is a proposition that Case cannot refuse. It's like giving heroin back to a heroin addict. He immediately agrees. However, they do him dirty. They also, in addition to fixing his nervous system, they implant microbes, a virus, into him that is on a time release. And if he doesn't complete the mission by a specified time, these microbes will activate and they will destroy his nervous implants, and he will go right back to where he was when they found him in Chiba City. So they got the carrot and they got the stick. So Armitage, who recruited Case, is a schizophrenic former United States Spec Ops colonel who was on a disastrous mission between a war between the USA and the USSR. And he is working for another employer who is unknown at this point. And their muscle that they bring in for them to help them with the physical intrusions that they have to do on this mission is Molly Millions, who is directly out of the short story Johnny Mnemonic from 1981. She comes back, makes an appearance here in the book. And she is a razor girl who has had mirrored sunglasses lens implanted directly into her skull that allow her to have enhanced vision. She has also had her nervous system increased cybernetically so that she has superhuman reflexes. And then underneath all of her fingernails and all of her hands, she has 2-inch razor blades that she can extend out and retract, a lot like Wolverine. And she's an exceptionally deadly individual. There's also another individual who's not alive, who also becomes a part of this group of outcasts, this downtrodden, misbegotten group of psychologically damaged and underworld figures. In other words, your typical cyberpunk group of protagonists, and that is Dixie Flatline. Dixie Flatline is a cowboy who encountered a particularly deadly piece of ice when he was out in the cyberspace, and it killed him, but his memory and his brain waves have been preserved on a ROM program that they boot up occasionally in order to assist Case when he is in cyberspace trying to hack into this entity for which he has been employed. And in my opinion, Dixie Flatline is the most entertaining character in the book. So this is the basic plot. Case has been hired by this group of individuals to go out and carry out this cybernetic attack in conjunction with a physical intrusion into this entity, Tessier Ashpole. And this mission revolves around an ascendant supercomputer that is a schizophrenic artificial intelligence. And that is the basic plot to Neuromancer. So what are the pros to this book? What are the good points? When I first read this book back in 1984, as either a teenager or in my early 20s, I was absolutely blown away with the concepts that had been presented here for the very first time. And it's just fantastic and wonderful cybernetic dystopian universe that William Gibson had created. And he imagines it completely and thoroughly and describes it in just a visceral manner here on the printed page in this book. And it's absolutely wonderful. His cast of characters are deeply fleshed out. They're disturbing people, but they're very well-formed characters that interact with this plot in a very entertaining way. And it is absolutely a mind-expanding novel, and that is the main attraction to this book. So if those are the pros, what are some of the cons of this book? And unfortunately, there are some major detractors to this book. And one of the biggest ones is that it is very disjointed. It is very convoluted in its writing. Now, some of that disjointedness is on purpose by William Gibson, but quite a bit of it is not. And it makes for a very confusing and disjointed read as a reader going through this novel. The other detractor for me in this book is that the characters, the main cast of characters, Armitage, Molly Millions, Case, with the exception of Dixie Flatline, who I found very entertaining, they're very dark. And I know it's cyberpunk, I know it's dystopian, it's supposed to be very dark, but they're too dark in my opinion. They're too dark. They don't have enough personal attributes, enough personality traits that make you want to like them. They become very unlikable characters, particularly Case, the main protagonist, who in addition to being addicted to jacking into cyberspace, is also a major drug addict. And drugs plays a very large role in this book, all the way from the start, all the way through to the finish. You have drug use, you have drug addiction, and you have everything that goes with those drug-addicted personalities, which does include the main character Case and virtually everybody else in this book. And back in 1984, when I first read this, I either overlooked it or it didn't bother me that much back then. But today, in the year 2025, that aspect of this book, in addition to how unlikable these characters are on top of that, really sort of got under my nerves, and I did not care for that aspect of the book. And that was part of this, the overall dark tone of the book that I thought was a little too much. It was too much for me going forward. I also thought that the ending of the book was a bit anticlimactic. But for me, one of the biggest problems I have with this book is that one of my pet peeves with speculative fiction is when authors engage in dream sequences and flashbacks. Now, there are not dream sequences or flashbacks directly in this book, but William Gibson makes use of the virtual internet, of this cyberspace reality, to create what are, in effect, cybernetic versions of dream sequences and flashbacks that occur throughout the novel. And it's a big reason why this novel is so disjointed, because these characters keep breaking in and out of working in reality and being involved in unreality in the virtual cyberspace world. And you don't know always, at least not at first, which reality that they're operating in. And these sequences here in the virtual reality world become, in effect, dream sequences and flashbacks. Now, they're executed well by William Gibson, but I still found it highly annoying. And particularly at the end of the book, there's an extended one of these virtual reality flashback sequences that really slowed the pace of the book right at the end, and I thought was a major detractor here to the novel. So that said, what is my conclusion here with this book? What did I think of this book as an entertainment novel here, as an entertainment science fiction novel, reading it in the year 2025? And if I had to grade this novel, I had to give it a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 7. I would give it a 7. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. It's just got too many problems for me to call it as good of a science fiction book, as entertaining a science fiction book, as his other seminal works that I mentioned before that I compared it to, as Dune, as Ringworld, as I, Robot, Starship Troopers. It's not as entertaining as those novels are because it has too many flaws, in my opinion. It just isn't there. So would I recommend this book to other people? If you're a science fiction fan and you haven't read Neuromancer by William Gibson, absolutely read it. It's one of those pillars of science fiction. You have to have it in your bibliography as one of the books that you've read as a science fiction fan. You absolutely have to go out and get this book and read it. It's worth reading. It's entertaining. It's just not a great novel, in my opinion. But if you've read Neuromancer, if you have an opinion on it, if you liked it, put down in the comment section why you liked it. What is it about this book that made it highly entertaining for you? Or if you didn't like it, if you agree or disagree with my points, my pros and my cons, let me know about it down in the comment section. But with that, I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.